Before we jump into this wild story, tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from. I love seeing how far these tales of chaos and karma can travel. The first time I saw that black SUV roll across my lawn, I figured it had to be a mistake. Maybe she swerved to avoid something in the road. Maybe she just misjudged the turn. People make mistakes. Life happens. I was willing to give her the benefit of the doubt. But when it happened again the next day and the day after that and again after that, any thought of it being accidental disappeared like morning dew under the sun. Her engine always warned me before she arrived, a deep, heavy growl that didn't belong on a quiet street. I'd stand at the kitchen window, coffee mug warm in my hands, and watch the same scene play out. The SUV jumped the curb and rolled straight over the bright green grass I'd spent years tending. She left behind crushed blades and churned soil. At first, it was barely noticeable. But over time, the tire marks turned into deep grooves, small trenches carved into what used to be soft, perfect lawn. The driver's name was Brenda Reynolds. She was only a few years older than me, maybe 40, always well kept and dressed like she was on her way to a charity lunch or an HOA board meeting. She carried herself like someone who believed the air was cleaner just above everyone else's heads. Brenda drove that black SUV like it was a tank, entitled Unstoppable, and utterly convinced that the world should make room for her. And in her mind it did. Everyone in our neighborhood knew her reputation. She wasn't officially on the HOA board, but she had influence like she owned it. She had opinions about everyone, what their lawns looked like, how they parked, even how they waved. Ironically, her own house wasn't perfect. The driveway edging was peeling and her mailbox leaned like it was trying to escape. I noticed, sure, but I never said anything. It wasn't my business. I like to stay in my lane, literally and figuratively. My name's Michael. I'm 38. I work from home and I take quiet pride in caring for my property. Mowing the lawn brings me peace. Edging the walkway makes the world feel just a little more orderly. Planting seasonal flowers adds color and purpose. It's not about showing off, it's about having something stable in a world that isn't. That's why it cut so deep to see someone disrespect it. Every time her tires rolled over that grass, it felt like she wasn't just flattening plants. She was stomping on something personal. When I finally decided to talk to her, I kept my voice as calm as I could. She was unloading shopping bags from her SUV when I walked over. "Hey," I said, "just wanted to mention, when you drive over the lawn, it tears it up a bit. Could you try swinging a little wider into your driveway?" Her eyes flicked toward me, full of annoyance, like I'd interrupted something far more important. "It's just grass," she said, barely stopping what she was doing. "It grows back." "Yes," I replied carefully, "but it's on my property." She laughed, a short, sharp sound that stung. "Michael, we all share the neighborhood. Don't be so uptight." Then she turned her back like that was the end of it. But it wasn't. Not for me. The next morning, her engine woke me up earlier than usual. I rushed to the window just in time to see her SUV roll across the lawn again, wheels digging deep into the rain-softened ground. The tracks were darker now, muddy scars that would take weeks to fix. That day, I tried a different approach. I called the HOA. The conversation was polite, but only in the way cold indifference can be polite. "We'll look into it," they said. But I could hear it in their tone. They wouldn't. Brenda was part of their inner circle. Barbecues, wine nights, school fundraisers, all of it. I didn't play golf. I didn't waste evenings debating wreath colors or mailbox styles. I liked peace and quiet. Unfortunately, that meant I didn't have allies. Still, I wasn't done. I started small. I placed solar lights along the curve of the lawn, simple, tasteful ones meant to mark the border clearly. The next morning, she drove right over them. The plastic cracked beneath her tires, scattering pieces across the grass like confetti from some cruel celebration. The day after that, I lined the edge with decorative stones. She moved them aside neatly and deliberately, before driving over the same patch again. It wasn't carelessness anymore, it was deliberate. Each pass was a message. Sometimes as she rolled by, her eyes would flick toward my window, and in that fleeting glance I could see it, triumph. The smug satisfaction of someone who'd found a pressure point and was pressing down, just to watch it hurt. One afternoon, while I was trimming the hedges, she slowed her SUV enough to roll down the window. Her voice came out sweet, but the words dripped with venom. You really shouldn't let little things get to you, she said, smiling faintly before driving off. Little things. The phrase echoed in my head long after she was gone, heavy as stones sinking into water. She didn't care about the lawn. What she cared about was control. She saw my reaction, and she enjoyed it. That night, I stepped outside and looked at the grooves her tires had carved into the earth. The air smelled like damp soil, a scent that should have felt grounding but instead left me hollow. The porch light cast a weak glow over the damaged grass, and the stillness of the neighborhood pressed in around me. Somewhere nearby, a sprinkler clicked on, hissing softly. That's when it hit me. This wasn't going to stop on its own. Asking politely had failed. Appealing to authority had failed. Even clear signals had failed. She believed she could do anything without consequence. And when people believe that, they only grow bolder. The anger I felt was sharp, but beneath it was something steadier. A decision forming piece by piece, like gears locking into place. I stood there a long time, jaw tight, breath slow, eyes fixed on the torn-up grass. I knew she'd drive by again in the morning. The sound of her engine, the rumble of her tires, it had become routine. But something inside me had changed. The destruction had gone far enough, and I was done asking nicely. The following week tested every shred of patience I had left. Each morning came with that same grinding noise, rubber on grass, the cruel rhythm of entitlement. My body reacted before my mind did. Jaw tightening, shoulders stiffening, that dull pulse behind my eyes. It wasn't just frustration anymore. It was anticipation, the kind that builds when you know something has to change, even if you haven't yet decided how. I gave it one last chance to end peacefully. One afternoon, I waited by my driveway as she stepped out of her SUV. The sun was high, the air heavy with heat. She carried a reusable grocery bag filled with organic vegetables and artisan bread, the kind of things people buy to feel morally superior. "Brenda," I said evenly, keeping my voice calm, "your driving across the lawn is causing real damage. I'm asking you directly to stop." She paused, shoulders tightening for just a moment before turning toward me. That familiar smirk spread across her face. "And I'm telling you," she said coolly, "I'm not doing anything wrong. The HOA already reviewed it. If you're that worried about grass, maybe you should find a hobby, something to make you less emotionally fragile." Her words were sharp, deliberate, meant to sting. She wanted a reaction. I felt the anger rise, the instinct to snap back, to match her arrogance with fury. But I didn't. Not because she didn't deserve it, but because I realized my anger could finally serve a purpose. "Understood," I said quietly. "Have a good afternoon." Her smirk faltered for just a second. The lack of reaction irritated her, but she said nothing more. She turned and walked inside. I went back to my house, and for the first time since this began, I felt something return. A sense of control. Not over her, but over what I'd do next. The lawn was worse than ever. Heavy rain had hit overnight, and her morning shortcut had turned the grass into a mud pit. Deep ruts carved through the soil. Mud splattered across the walkway. The clean edges I'd worked so hard to keep now smudged and broken. Standing there, I could almost feel every hour I'd spent maintaining that lawn, every straight mowing line, every trimmed edge, every bit of care reduced to wreckage. This wasn't thoughtlessness anymore. It was calculated disrespect, and that difference mattered. So I spent the rest of that day researching, not out of spite but strategy, property boundary laws, local landscaping ordinances, vehicle trespassing regulations. By the end of the night, the picture was clear. I was completely within my rights to install a barrier along the edge of my lawn, as long as it didn't block pedestrian paths and stayed within my property line. It didn't need to be fancy or explained. It just needed to exist. At first, I thought about simple options: stakes, short fencing, even large potted plants. But none of those would survive a 2-ton vehicle driven by arrogance and entitlement. What I needed was something immovable, something that wouldn't escalate the conflict with words, but would end the behavior with quiet finality. That's when I discovered the bollards, stainless steel security posts, the kind used to stop cars from hitting storefronts or entering restricted zones. Clean, modern, durable, and most importantly, legal. When set deep in concrete, they were unshakable, unaffected by force or weight. They weren't aggressive. They were simply there, a boundary made real. That evening, I drove to a commercial hardware supplier on the edge of town. The warehouse stretched wide, the air thick with the scent of oil and cold metal. The worker who helped me didn't ask a single question as I loaded 4 heavy cylindrical bollards onto a flatbed cart. He just nodded, rang me up, and said, "Good luck." The kind of good luck you say when you already understand what someone's doing and why. By the time I got home, dusk had settled. The neighborhood was calm, porch lights flicking on one by one. I parked my truck, unloaded the bollards, and got to work. The rhythmic scrape of the post hole digger cut into the earth, steady and deliberate. The labor was hard, sweat running down my back, but it felt grounding. Each hole had to be deep, each measurement exact. The spacing had to follow the curve of the lawn perfectly, right where her tires always passed. The air smelled like cut grass and damp soil. The moon rose quietly above the rooftops, pale and patient. I worked with the focus of someone who had let go of hesitation, someone who finally understood that peace sometimes has to be built. By midnight, the holes were ready. I mixed the concrete in a wide tub, thick and heavy, the sound echoing softly through the still air. Lowering each bollard took strength I didn't know I had. They were heavier than they looked, but one by one they sank into the concrete, straight and unyielding. I smoothed the surface, wiped the sweat from my forehead, and exhaled slowly. The work was finished. The line had been drawn, not in words but in steel. For a long moment I stood there looking at what I'd made. The posts gleamed faintly under the moonlight, reflecting it like quiet sentinels waiting for dawn. The air felt cooler, calmer, like even the neighborhood itself recognized the shift. In the morning it looked almost elegant. The stainless steel caught the sunlight in sharp, clean flashes. The grass around them seemed greener, as if reclaiming its pride. I brewed my coffee, the familiar scent rising like ritual. Everything felt normal except me. Right on schedule I heard it, the low growl of her engine. That same heavy rumble I'd come to recognize instantly. I moved to the window, mug warm in my hands, heart steady but focused. Brenda's black SUV appeared, gliding forward with that same careless confidence. She began the turn, cutting across the curb in her usual shortcut, completely unaware that the rules had changed overnight. She didn't slow down. For a second, time seemed to hold its breath. The tires rolled closer, the bumper nearing the shining steel. I didn't move. The air felt charged, thick with inevitability. Then, impact. The sound wasn't loud or dramatic. Just one sharp metallic strike, followed by a deep grinding groan as her SUV met something that refused to yield. The bollards didn't budge, didn't bend, didn't even shiver. The SUV, however, folded instantly. The hood crumpled inward like foil. The bumper snapped, plastic shards scattering across the grass that for once stood its ground. A headlight burst with a bright flash, the pieces tumbling across the soil. The vehicle lurched forward and stopped dead at a crooked angle. The engine sputtered, coughed once, then died. For a moment, silence filled the street. Even the birds seemed to pause. I stood at my window, coffee still warm in my hands, and let out a slow breath. There was no triumph in it, just the quiet calm that follows a storm finally spent. And then came the yelling. The driver's door slammed open, and Brenda stumbled out. Her face was flushed red with fury, twisted into something almost unrecognizable. She wasn't shocked by what had happened. That told me everything. She wasn't angry about the damage to her car. She was angry that something had stopped her. Someone had told her no, and it had finally stuck. "What did you do?" she screamed, her voice cracking. Strands of hair clung to her sweaty forehead as she glared toward my house. "You did this on purpose. You sabotaged my car. You're insane." I stepped outside, not slowly or dramatically, just calm and steady. The morning sun stretched long shadows across the lawn, and the stainless steel posts gleamed in the light like silent sentinels. I installed protective barriers on my property. I said evenly, "You've been driving over my lawn for weeks. You were warned." "That's a lie," she snapped, though the tire tracks cutting across the grass told the truth for me. "I'm calling the HOA. I'm calling the police." "You're going to pay for this," she shouted, her voice trembling with a mix of rage and panic. A few neighbors had already stepped outside, drawn by the sound of the crash. None came to defend her. They came to witness what everyone had secretly been waiting for. Some folded their arms, others whispered. One man just shook his head. "You were trespassing," I repeated calmly. "I filed reports with the HOA twice. I emailed you directly. I even marked the border. You ignored all of it. She pointed a shaking finger at me. You can't just put metal poles in the ground. I have the permits, I replied, pulling a folded paper from my pocket. Approved by the city 3 days ago. Legal, within my property line, and completely justified to prevent further damage. Her eyes widened, not in guilt, but disbelief that she'd finally run into a rule she couldn't bend. This is ridiculous. You're going to jail. You vandalized my car. A voice cut in from behind her. No, actually, that's not vandalism. It was Mark, one of the HOA board members. He stepped forward with his arms crossed, watching the scene with quiet authority. If you drive onto someone else's property on purpose, any damage to your vehicle is your responsibility, he said firmly. And we've had multiple witnesses confirm you've done it repeatedly. Brenda turned toward him, eyes wide with betrayal. You're taking his side? After everything I've done for this neighborhood? Mark sighed, his tone weary but certain. Brenda, you've made things difficult for a lot of people. We've looked the other way long enough. But this, he gestured at her crushed SUV and the spotless steel posts. This is on you. Her face twisted. She made a noise, half growl, half sob, and stormed back to her car, as if sheer willpower could undo what had happened. She tried to start it, but the engine coughed once and fell silent. Smoke curled up from the dented hood. Her shoulders slumped, and for the first time since I'd met her, she looked small. Not sorry, just confronted by the weight of her own choices. The police arrived soon after. They asked questions, inspected the scene, and reviewed the footage I'd saved. Clear, time-stamped proof of every trespass. Several neighbors confirmed what they'd seen for weeks. When the officer finally turned to her, his tone was steady and professional. Ma'am, based on documented incidents of repeated trespassing and property damage, you're legally responsible for restitution to the property owner. Your insurance may not cover this. It appears to be intentional misconduct. Brenda didn't argue. She didn't shout this time. She just stood there staring at the ground as the reality of it all finally settled in. The fight had drained out of her, leaving something smaller behind, almost deflated. She gave a stiff, reluctant nod. The tow truck arrived soon after. Her SUV was hauled away, its front end mangled, leaking a thin trail of oil that shimmered darkly on the pavement. One by one, the neighbors drifted back to their homes. The street fell quiet again. I turned toward my house, each step steady and sure, the morning air warm against my skin. The steel posts stood firm and flawless, silent guardians of a peace I had earned. The lawn was still scarred, the soil still torn, but the damage had stopped. The pattern was broken. Over the next few weeks, the consequences played out as naturally as gravity. Her insurance company denied the claim. The HOA issued citations for repeated trespassing and property damage, along with fines she couldn't brush aside. Neighbors who had once tolerated her now avoided her completely. Her influence vanished, not because I exposed her, but because her actions had finally spoken louder than her words. I reseeded the lawn, filled the ruts, and smoothed the soil. Slowly the grass returned, bright, resilient, alive. Each new blade rose like a quiet declaration that peace had taken root again. The steel posts remained unyielding, unapologetic, exactly where they belonged. One calm Saturday morning as I watered the new grass, I saw her step outside. She didn't look my way. Her shoulders slumped, her face softened, not out of remorse but recognition. She collected her mail and went back inside without a word, and that was enough. The neighborhood settled into silence once more. The mornings felt lighter, the air easier to breathe. I stood there with the hose running, sunlight glinting off the water droplets, and realized something simple but powerful. Boundaries aren't always drawn on paper. Sometimes they're built from steel and resolve, quietly saying, "This far, no further." The grass grew thick and green again. The street stayed calm. And I knew, without needing to check, that not a single tire had crossed that line since. Brenda kept her distance after the insurance fallout and the quiet humiliation that followed. Funny how quickly a bully backs down once they realize they can't control you. Not with words, not with threats, and definitely not with a car. My home finally felt like mine again. And every morning, when the sunlight catches those steel posts just right, I can't help but smile, not out of spite, but out of calm satisfaction, because sometimes the best victories aren't loud or vengeful. They're the ones built with patience, planning, and a quiet cup of morning coffee. If you enjoyed this story, let me know in the comments. Have you ever dealt with a neighbor like this? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Your support means a lot and it helps keep stories like this coming.